You're somewhere in the Colorado mountains, riding away in your favorite hotel. Your fingers glide across the keys so effortlessly as your thoughts come to life on the pages staring back at you. Then, for a moment, you pause. Your gaze rolls over to the window. The glass is cold to the touch, and frost has eaten away most of it. But you can still make out the midwinter snow in the distance as the inches of the unseen ice bed builds ever so ominously. Suddenly, you snap out of it and quickly return to the task at hand. I have to finish this, you urged aloud. So your fingers resume their graceful glide across the keyboard. Finally, the end of the hour grants you victory. An exact genuine of genius is what you achieved. You slip into your coat and run out the door, with keys jingling in one hand and the only copy of your best manuscript held so tightly to your chest. As fate unravels, with you securely locked inside your car, the spinning of wheels lead you down the slippery roads. All signs of civilization disappear from your rear view. Then, in a blink of an eye, just like that, the sky is the ground, and the ground the sky. Shock overwhelms you as confusion bewitches you. Before you know it, a black cloud casts over your eyes. It was only a moment, but it felt like eternity. That was all it took. Your eyes flutter open, and suddenly, staring back at you, is a woman with excitement and craze in her eyes. She can't believe she finally bagged the author of her dreams. But a dream quickly becomes a nightmare when reality sinks in. You are completely under her every whim and will, stone cold fear, and survival finally kicks in. This is exactly what happened to Paul Sheldon in Stephen King's 1987 novel, Misery. A classic winter thriller for those looking for the perfect read for the frosty season. Grab something warm, like a blanket or hot cocoa, settle in your seat, and join me on episode 2 of Literatureology as I deep dive into one of the most recommended winter reads of all time. Hi, I'm Eliot, and I welcome you to the fascinating world of Literatureology, a world I created for the avid readers, the passionate writers, the soulful songwriters, and the dreamers looking for the perfect story to escape into. Today's episode is going to be so much fun because we will be deep diving into one of my favorite authors. And just to preface, I know the last episode was a review on horror. I promise you, we won't only be talking about horror. Of course, we will be talking about every genre that I could possibly run into. But for the sake of this dreary, cold, frosty, even snowy for anyone who has gotten snow, reads like this is actually a little fun. One thing I enjoy about the winter, I don't necessarily like the cold, but I like doing winter things, which is like sitting by a warm fireplace, drinking hot tea or hot chocolate, or sitting on my couch and reading my favorite books that have the same kind of cold aspect to it. So, this kind of read is definitely for those that like these kind of books. It's the kind of horror it's not grotesque horror, it's not ridiculous horror, it's not cheesy horror, it's simple, slow building, but suspense. Think of any horror movie you watch where there was a snowstorm and everything just looks so calm to the on the surface level, but the whole entire movie you just slowly but surely see the creeping crawly like sinking in. It's that kind of horror. But first, for those who are not as familiar with Stephen King, let me just introduce to you who he is. So, he is a household name. A lot of authors dream of that, but he made it. He is a household name, and he has had significant impact on pop culture. So, if you have heard of the name, more than likely you've seen some film adaptations. Even if you never heard of the name, you've more than likely ran into a Stephen King something, whether it's like a joke, a reference, or like a literal scene. He's pretty much in pop culture, basically. Um, for those who watch a lot of movies, you've probably heard of The Shining or It or Carrie. Maybe even some not so common classics, but maybe more so for the 80s and 90s kids, like Firestarter. That's another good one. And Pet Cemetery. So, let me give you some detailed background of the author himself. So, Stephen King is a well credited horror novelist who has contributed greatly to the modern age of suspense and thriller in pop culture. On September 21st, 1947, Stephen King was born to Donald and Nellie Ruth Pillsbury King in Portland, Maine. However, he and his brother David spent his childhood switching between both parents, where one lived in Indiana and the other Connecticut. Eventually, the siblings finally settled down with their mother in Maine and attended Lisbon Falls High School, from which he graduated in 1966. Soon after, Stephen King attended University of Maine, where he studied English and wrote for the school newspaper and also served its committee. So this is where Stephen King starts to hone in on his craft and passion for writing. At some point, he published his first short story in a publication called Startling Mystery Stories. Eventually, Stephen King graduated with a degree in English in 1970 and tried to land a position as a teacher, which is completely understandable. For those, who went to college, we all relate to the feeling of studying for a particular degree, but you don't end up getting the job that you studied for. It's like, it feels like a waste of money, but at the same time, it's kind of like a good thing because most people land into jobs that are, well, feels like your calling. And in a way, that kind of happened to Stephen King. But let's continue to follow his storyline. So, unfortunately, nothing came up for Stephen, leaving him very few options like working a humble position in a laundromat. During this time, he really honed in on his craft and continued writing. However, life seemed to sweeten on Stephen in late 1971, where he finally captured a position as an English professor at Hampton Academy. In the same year, he married his now long term wife, Tabitha Spruce, who was also known as a writer in her own right. And when I did research on Stephen King, I did come across the fact that she is an author too. Um, it kind of looks like she follows a little bit of Stephen King's style, but I never really read a book by her, or maybe I did but didn't realize it. So at some point, I would like to look into her work to see what she's like. Okay, so now we're in 1974, and this is where the fun begins. So 1974 came around with a whole bag of surprises, leading to many accomplishments for Stephen King. He published his very first novel, Carrie, which followed a teenage girl with the same name, tormented by her peers until she finally paints the school dance red with revenge. The book was a smash hit on the first go round and eventually landed him the opportunity to write full time. So now we're in 1976, and this is where Stephen King sees his first adaptation of his very first book. So, Carrie. And for the 70s, 80s, 90s babies, maybe even the early 2000s, those who are very familiar with like classic horror films, you've probably seen this film version that came out in 1976, which was played, the actress who played Carrie was Sissy Spake? Spacek? I'm so sorry for butchering her name, but it's literally spelled like space and then with a K at the end. So Spake, something like that. But yeah, she's in a way is known as a scream queen. But let's go back one more year, 1975, and this is where Stephen King publishes another book. This one he published, it's called Salem's Lot. And then in 1977, a year after the adaptation of Carrie, saw The Shining. And then 1980 saw Firestarter. The following year saw Cujo, and 1986 saw It. As much as I love Stephen King, this is the only novel, the only thing that I hate. Only because I have a big clown phobia. I don't like clowns. I don't. And that is what it is about, for those who don't know it. So if you have a clown phobia, don't watch it. Um, yeah, I don't like it. don't. I just don't like it. Even the remakes in 2017 and 2019 were a bit unforgiving. Like, yeah, I don't know. For those who were around, like, obviously, but I vividly remember 2016, 2017-ish in high school where the clown scare was happening all over social media and it was dumb. I hated it. I was so mad. Around the late 70s and early 80s publishing, Stephen King wrote more books under the pseudonym Richard Bachman. So while it sounds random, basically Stephen King coined the name Richard. The first name is, he got it from when he found this book. It was by a different author named Richard Stark, so he took that name. And the last name Bachman was actually from an artist called Bachman Turner Overdrive, and he was listening to a song called "You See Nothing Yet" or "You Haven't Seen Nothing Yet," something like that. So he coined the name, but basically he was afraid that the books that he also wanted to publish, aside from the classics ones that I just listed, he was afraid that they wouldn't get accepted by his core fan base. So he thought publishing under a pseudonym would kind of save him the grief in a way. Ironically, even those books saw success in their own right. They're also classics for those who read the Richard Bachman books. I also want you to hold on to this thought as well as Stephen King low key being afraid of his books being accepted at the time, and him having to publish under a pseudonym, because in a way it's low key related to the topic of this episode. It's really ironic, so just hang in there. The thing that many Stephen King fans also like about him, he has this quirk about him that he can write so many books at breakneck speed. Literally. Like it's like he can publish write and publish a book in the same year. It's really crazy. So him writing that much, and of course he spent so much time working on his craft, so he wrote so many books that it contributed to his fame basically. And of course a lot of these books also contributed to pop culture, so that really started to give a foundation for his career as an author, and also give a foundation for his books to have such a lasting impact on pop culture even today. Now, Stephen King has written so many books, and you can even find recent publishings in the millennial slash Gen Z age. I mean, he even just published a book last year in September called Holly. But let me not get ahead of myself. I'll list the books that he published in these recent years. In the 2010s, Joyland saw a publishing in 2013, and the same year in 2013, he published Doctor Sleep, which Doctor Sleep is actually a sequel to The Shining. And that's another quirk of Stephen King is that many of his characters kind of show up in his later novels. It's almost like a Tyler Perry esque kind of thing where a lot of his characters kind of are in the same universe. Going back to the book Holly that he published last year. So, Holly is the book follows the character Holly, who appeared multiple times in another series called the first book was Mr. Mercedes, and then the other one was Finders Keepers. I actually read that book and I didn't realize that was a series. And then the third book of that series in itself was End of Watch. So she showed up in all these books and then she finally got a book of her own. It's kind of giving, you know, the horror movie X, and how a lot of there's like Pearl was such a charismatic character and she ended up getting her own movie called Pearl. I haven't seen it yet, but from what I heard, it kind of sounds cool, but yeah, it's kind of like that in a way. That's the gist of Stephen King and his background, his rise to fame, and his catalog is things that make him Stephen King, basically. And now we get to finally get into the meat and potatoes of today's episode. So today we're traveling back to 1987 and we will be following the storyline of Misery, which follows two characters that are kind of iconic, especially the antagonist. So, like every storyline, we have an antagonist and a protagonist in a way. Annie Wilkes is the iconic villain that still continues to live in horror to this day. And then we have the protagonist, Paul Sheldon. He's the one who jumpstarts the storyline with him being in the Colorado mountains, working on a manuscript, and unfortunately driving through a snowstorm, which is not a good idea, guys. Not a good idea. Please don't do that. And unfortunately, he got into a pretty bad accident. And Annie, she happened to be there at the crash site and she rescued him and pulled him back to her place. And the thing we're supposed to believe at first about Annie is that she has these like motherly like characteristics. She's nursing him back to recovery. She kind of fixed his legs because they were like badly injured, and she's giving him like painkillers to help with his pain. She's giving him rest. She put him in this room so he feels, you know, a little bit more cushioned through his pain. It's almost like an at home kind of um we're getting like a Red Cross kind of feel with this, but through Annie. So we get this about her. But then as the story unfolds, it's like we almost quickly start to see something off about her. Even a little bit from jump, but we quickly start to see off about her. And what we're supposed to hang on to is the fact that she's basically a crazed fan of Paul Sheldon. Why is she a crazed fan of Paul Sheldon? Because Paul, in the Misery novel, the Misery universe, he is an author, da 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 da, and he is known for this series called the Misery series, and it follows the character named Misery Chaston, where it's more like a Victorian romantic as kind of novel series, and yeah, you just each book follows the life and adventures of Misery, and a lot of them kind of grab the attention of a possibly younger or romantic kind of audience that you know are more susceptible to fantasize basically, and Annie just happened to be one of those people. And also, she's supposedly trying to nurse him until the roads clear because, like, obviously, the snowstorm, you can't really travel during a snowstorm. The roads are like all ice and slick, so they're very dangerous. And they kind of have to wait till the roads are clear for Paul to be taken to the hospital. And this entire time, we are following a mess, basically. We are following a messy, crazy, intense, nightmarish relationship between an author and his fandom. Remember how I said earlier that Stephen King low key was afraid of publishing his other novels that were outside of the popular ones that he was known for? Yeah. Continue to hold on to that thought because one of the lasting legacies of Misery is the exploration of the dark side of fandom culture. Yeah, basically. Annie Wilkes, the antagonist, epitomizes the dangers of unchecked fantasism and the potential consequences when the boundaries between creators and fans become dangerously blurred. So, this theme resonates in the modern era as well, which is also, if you're new to literatureology, this is kind of what we do here. We analyze classic reads, even contemporary reads. We analyze literature in all aspects and we try to understand how it still applies to our everyday lives in the middle modern age. So that's where the fun is. Like we're also exploring different worlds, but we're also exploring different analogies and lessons that we get from these books. Because if you're a reader if you're a reader, you love reading, you kind of are exploring a different world, but it also is in a way kind of giving you kind of insight about your own world basically. So that's what I find fun about reading. The theme still resonates in this modern age, especially with social media and influencers like celebrities and actors, singers. And it also relates to the fact that because we have social media and all these kinds of influencers, it almost amplifies the known issue about fandom culture. But the novel's legacy extends beyond literature. It, again, was one of those Stephen King books that saw the big screens. And the role of, see, Annie, another reason why Annie is so popular, such a popular Stephen King villain, is that she was played by Kathy Bates. So a lot of times when you think of Annie Wilkes, you can't not think of Kathy Bates' face. And this movie was such a smash hit that it gave her an Academy Award. This movie came out in 1990, and yeah, it really amplified some of the more quiet suspense and the book. So the book, you kind of feel immersed in the suspense, but like when you watch the film, it's like almost amplified. It still doesn't use anything cheesy or crazy, but it's just using the elements, literary elements by itself to bring out suspense. And that's what I love about authors like Stephen King. I'm not, people are different, they have their own taste, but I prefer people using storytelling to express the feelings and emotions we're supposed to have instead of just saying it or just putting it out there in the most like rambunctious, obnoxious way. Yeah. So basically, horror is not the same anymore. But that's my little tangent there. But that's not the focus of today. Today we're talking about the book. um, So, in summary, Misery continues to captivate and disturb audiences with its exploration of fan obsession, psychological horror, and the complexities of creative expression. Its legacy is firmly embedded in both literary and cinematic history, showcasing Stephen King's ability to craft narratives that resonate across mediums and stand the test of time. So, like with most novels, most storytelling, we want to analyze the characters because they give us more context into the plot, the mind of the author, how the literary elements are used in the plot. So let's start with some character analysis. And of course, our two main players are Paul Sheldon and Annie Wilkes. So let's start with Paul. because he jumpstarts the plot with him being in the Colorado mountains, writing off this manuscript. There's something significant about the manuscript. So, again, he's a famous author in this universe and he's known for the misery novels. So, this manuscript is called Fast Cars and it's not an additional book to the misery series. If anything, the goal is he's trying to redirect his career in a way he's taking more seriously as well established author than that author who wrote the misery novels. He wants more respect in the writer universe. So to have a better way of understanding this, let's think of Paul as like a Disney star, and then the misery novels is like Disney, and then the fan base is like all the Disney stands who have this not so healthy idea of the Disney star. And then we holding on to that thought is that think of the manuscript as his way of now Disney stars have had their controversial, like that one controversial moment to been purposely done so they can like shed off the Disney skin. So think of that manuscript as like a way of him shedding off the misery novel skin, but he actually did something else that is more controversial in the eyes of someone like Annie. Basically, he axes off misery. So, again, because the misery novels is more like a Victorian romantic scene. The thing about childbirth, even now to today, like childbirth is still kind of high risk, but back then, when there wasn't as much medical advances as there is today, childbirth was still very high risk. In this instance, Paul kind of made it so that misery didn't make it through the childbirth, unfortunately. So it's really drastic, and it was purposely done so that the misery novels were not recoverable. Now, for someone like Annie, that really causes a division. And then at some point in the novel, after the accident, we meet Annie. So she's the die-hard fan. Like she's a devout fan. She knows a lot of things about him. She knows him, which is a red flag for anyone who says, I know this person, where they're like, no, you just know of them, you don't know them kind of thing. She loves the misery novels so much so that she even named her pet pig Misery. I'm not joking, but some fans actually do this. It's a little creepy. Yeah, she names her pet pig Misery. She even makes Misery meets Paul. It's so weird. I'm not even kidding. But Annie is also an interesting character for the simple fact that I find her so intriguing because she's like a digestible villain. She is. Like despite her being so like unstable, unpredictable, not so cut and dry, very formidable throughout the novel, she's almost like a classic villain to me. Like she's still very digestible in a way. It's not like a whole bunch is thrown at you. It's still like enough where her scary side jumps at you, but like she's very you can pretty much I enjoy reading about the villain. It's so weird. It's kind of like one of those things where um the personally um might be an unpopular opinion to some, but I personally find the DC villains more intriguing than the DC superheroes, and I find Marvel's villains not so intriguing, more like a little cheesy. So in the sense of like storytelling, I find Annie and that DC villainous kind of thing where it's like there's more to them than just the bad guy. And what's more so is that she, she's kind of like the dark thing that looms over the entire book, kind of like how Ryuk looms over Light Yakame for all the anime stands out there. Think of her as like a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of deal. And going back to Paul's character, I kind of meant to mention is that he comes out very simple, very bland, and very just there because we're observing everything through his lenses in a way. So it kind of feels like he's just a lump on the bed, but he really isn't though, because the way he interacts with Annie, the way he tries to outsmart her, it's you can tell there's a bit of a multifaceted character in Paul that you don't get at first glance. You kind of have to pay attention to his subtle way of being, basically. It's really, really interesting. Like, there are some scenes where when Annie's going off, basically, he kind of like pretends to surrender when in actuality he's manipulating her backs the entire time. So she's manipulating him and then he's manipulating her. And then there's the instance where even just looking into his background, you kind of get the feel that he's fighting for any shred of autonomy. At some point, Annie finds the fast cars manuscript, and with his permission, she reads it, and she calls herself critiquing it because she knows his true potential as a writer. Red flag for any creator out there. If a fan ever comments, "I know your true potential," red flag. Just saying. Anyways, you kind of don't, because you didn't create them, but okay. Anyways, she feels like she knows his true potential as a writer, right? So she's giving him all these constructive criticism. And the thing was, we want to pay attention to Annie as well, is that she's like this, she comes off like this angel, like this good character, but she also has this god complex. It's giving off like Nurse Ratched in a way, where she comes off very Mother Teresa like. Then she has this really weird spiel about morality that makes her go off. This happens with the scene where, and this is just in chapter 3. So, like, we haven't even got through the book yet, basically, with this scene, this example, right? So, Annie is like going off about like how there's too much swearing in the novels, and Paul's like, well, normal people talk like that, and she goes off like, no, they don't, and she goes in this tangent, right? And then she's there's that sign there that she's like, she wants him to write according to how she feels is his best potential. And then there's later on the book where she full on pulls out a grill, makes him burn the book. So there's those examples where um and in that scene he's like, he kind of breaks down because he's in this very dire situation. His legs are broken, he can't move, he's still sick, he's still fighting basically for recovery, and there's this woman who's just trying to take over him. And it you can see this fight for like self-preservation, but then also having to surrender to self-destruction for the sake of survival. It's actually, in a way, kind of reminds you of the creator audience relationship, the fan influencer relationship, with the fandom culture. You kind of can get that sense because a lot of fandoms prefer the creators to stick to a certain fantasy that they have in their heads. Because let's be real, we're all fans of something because, a lot of times our lives are a little might be boring, or we need a little bit something more interesting, or there's too much going on in our lives and we're looking for an escape. So we have these entertainers. And a lot of times the unhealthy viewers, the unhealthy audiences latch on to a certain fantasy. And it's like if the creators have a misstep, it's like they go off. And we see this all the time, and especially in the age of social media. We see this all the time. And I'll explain that. Look, we'll talk more about that later on in this episode. But that's basically something to keep in mind when thinking of Paul and Annie. Let's get more into exploring the plot itself, where we can start looking at some of the elements used in the plot that really gives the storytelling more life, basically. So I've noticed a little bit that there's something called metafiction, and it shows its face time and time in Stephen King's novel. Not as obvious, but it's subtle. So basically, remember that misery misery is it focuses on the relationship between an author and his fans. But if you kind of focus it more on, if you look at it from an outside in, it feels like it's, you know, we're looking at a weird example of how fandom culture can get toxic, right? So, Misery kicks down the fourth wall by drawing readers into this intimate and very unsettling relationship between an author and his fan base. So, the novel delves into the darker side of fandom, portraying Annie Wilkes as the embodiment of an obsessive fan. And then, in doing so, Stephen King explores the blurred boundaries between fiction and reality, allowing readers to peer into the dynamics that can emerge between creators and their most dedicated followers. So, for those who are probably not familiar with metafiction, I'll explain that a little bit. So, metafiction is actually a literary device. It's a real device that sometimes writers use to that it involves self-awareness of the narrative as a work of fiction. So it goes beyond typical storytelling conventions, and it acknowledges its own constructed nature, whether it's the way the narrative is going on, or using the characters to show an acknowledgement that it is a work of fiction in a way. So metafiction can show up anywhere, like films, TV series, plays, and of course literature. And in the context of pop culture, there are examples like Family Guy, a lot of metafiction there. And then Supernatural, there are a couple of episodes that are just straight up metafiction, and it's a lot of times it's entertaining. And they broke the fourth wall by referencing their own existence as television shows, or um, at least Family Guy did. Supernatural kind of acknowledged that it's not real in a way. Like in the plot, there's a book series called Supernatural, and it's about the main characters, and the characters are kind of like following along the storytelling, so they're aware that um they're aware that there's work about them, but we're aware that they're fictional characters. And then another example is the Velma show, by focusing on the iconic Scooby-Doo character Velma Dinkley. It's kind of controversial in a way when it first came out. I remember it was like, I think it was last year. Like everyone hated it when it first came out. I have to preface that metafiction is really not that. It's not a beloved literary device. It is preface that. A lot of times, a lot of people prefer it if authors, writers, creators don't use metafiction or meta jokes. Some people really do hate it. The only ones who really do enjoy meta references or metafiction are like the core fans who make certain references, or those kind of fans that are known for writing fan fiction on Wattpad. And Velma Dinkley was like, the Velma show was a major example of why people hate metafiction. King, in a way, Stephen King, he uses metafiction, at least I believe so, that he uses metafiction because it seems like he's using Paul and Annie to comment on the potential dangers of fan obsession and the influence it can exert on the creative process. We see metafiction manifest as Paul Sheldon. So the protagonist and the author grapples with the consequences of his own creation, Misery Chaston. The novel within the novel featuring Misery serves as a metafictional device, providing insight into the relationship between creators and their fictional worlds. For example, Paul has been working on an entirely new novel, as I mentioned, called Fast Cars, to help him shut off the Misery association, but he also allowed an extreme end of the character Misery Chaston so that the character in the novel was not recoverable. However, Annie's harsh reactions to the end of Misery, literally going off on Paul, and how she kept negatively critiquing Fast Cars until the point of making him burn the book on the grill. Again, I'm not joking, this really happened. Reminded me of how icy fan bases attacked their own favorites, especially when like their own favorites try to explore different ventures. As an example, many Marvel fans didn't like Thor: Love and Thunder. And I'll be real. I was one of the peoples that didn't like peoples. Sorry. But I was one of the people who didn't like Thor and Love and Thunder for the simple fact that I couldn't follow the plot, so like I kind of just checked out midway through the movie. There was a lot of craziness happening, but not for the reasons like the diehard Marvel fans hated the Thor: Love and Thunder movie. For one, there was a female Thor, and Thor's lover was female Thor, which I don't know if a lot of the Marvel fans even took the time to realize is that there is a female Thor in the Marvel universe because the Marvel universe is a multi-universe. So it's a female Thor, a female Hulk, a female Captain America. It's kind of funny, but yeah, um, those things do exist. And but because Marvel fans are mainly predominantly a male-fronted audience, a lot of them don't really like the female versions of the superhero characters. So I guess that's understandable. And the other part is that they didn't like the way Thor was handled. I kind of agree there a little bit because, Thor is usually known for being dramatic and moody and broody and like very a serious character. But, after the last two movies, he kind of became like a joking, a punching bag, or kind of like a comedic piece. It's kind of hard to watch after a while, but unlike the diehard fans, you know, my day is still going. The movie happened, and I kind of don't care that it happened, but devout fans like the Marvel fans went on a tangent. They did. They went on a tangent. So much so that they attacked the Marvel movie creators, basically. So, yeah, I mean, it's not saying you're not allowed as an audience to have an opinion about what you're watching because at the end of the day, the whole purpose as a creator and an entertainer is to appeal to the audience and their demographics that they're fall into. And if you don't appeal to a certain demographic or an audience, that demographic slash audience moves on to someone else who can give them what they're looking for. That's usually what happens. However, there's a fine line between like critique and a disassociation or a lack of awareness of a demographic audience versus the audience and devoted fans kind of forgetting that it's just not that deep. It's not that deep. They can live through a bad album. They can live through a bad Taylor Swift album. They can live through a bad Marvel movie. But in their minds, in their worlds, they think they can't. It's actually really kind of sad when you think about it. The main point here is that how metafiction is used in Misery, and it's highlighting Paul's struggle for creative freedom and the impact of fans' expectations on his work to exemplify the exploration of the author fan dynamic within the narrative. Now, remember when I mentioned earlier when Stephen King kind of had this dilemma when he published books under a different pseudonym because he was afraid of how his books would be accepted alongside the very popular ones that he created? So that's where a lot of people, or at least some, Stephen King critics, kind of were thinking that maybe he was low key inserting himself into the plot, that maybe Paul is kind of like that Stephen King was kind of, inserting himself into the character Paul in a way. So, and then of course, there are some references that I found that Stephen King did kind of use Misery to express his personal struggles, like with addiction and things like that. I still haven't found like a direct quote that says this or like a direct confirmation. So it's kind of like a educated guess based on what have learned about Stephen King and learning more about the book itself. It feels like there's a bit of a self insertion here. And now we get to deep dive into the actual elements that are used to convey the storytelling here. So this is where the fun part is. So the elements that Stephen King seems to be using, one of them is psychological horror. So psychological horror is actually one of my favorite genres. It really is. It's Doesn't need any of the raunchiness. As I said, it doesn't. I can't stand horror with all the raunchy stuff. If you know what I mean, you know what I mean. But this is also a classic technique of Stephen King's. He kind of does a lot of psychological horror. In Misery, the focus is not solely on the external threats coming from Annie, but rather the internal struggles of Paul himself and how he's reacting to what's going on around him and reacting to the person that's antagonizing him, basically. The captivity, manipulation, and gaslighting by Annie Wilkes delve into the depths of human psyche, creating a sense of dread that like lingers beyond the pages. So like you can feel the creepiness jumping at you, basically. And then another element that he possibly uses is isolation and claustrophobia. So King uses the isolation method with the setting of the Colorado mountains. I in case you probably might have maybe forgot. But yeah, this entire book is happening in Colorado. So the isolated setting of the Colorado mountains to enhance the suspense. So we have this vast snowy landscape, which is it's like a backdrop in a way. It's beautiful and also menacing because there's a foreshadow in a way that's happening. And then the confinement within Annie's home, the single room, the room that he's in, where Paul is held captive, adds like a thick layer of claustrophobia, like this sense of tightness as Annie gets more and more darker throughout the novel. There's no escape. Yeah. So it intensifies this sense of helplessness. And then we have the unpredictable antagonist. That is Annie Wilkes herself. She is a technique. She is formidable and unpredictable, and I see King kind of shaping her throughout the novel in a very it's kind of a consistent kind of shifting, but it's also non-consistent where you can it feels uncanny and you can pick up on it as a reader. So he makes her switch between the sweet and almost motherly person concerning the fact that she's nursing Paul back to health, and then she's switching from that to this sudden shift of like being filled with so much outburst and like this temper. It just comes out of nowhere. And how quickly she snaps back into it, though, not as quickly, but like she shifts into that dark side faster than she shifts out of it. So it's like there's an imbalance. And even there's a bit of a the way King wrote out this dynamic, he paints a picture in our minds when he says this. So, everybody in the world has a center. Whatever mood a person is in, whatever clothes he or she is wearing, we recognize that person because he or she has a solid basis. So, again, we are we're starting off with human psychology, the psyche, and he's establishing like, okay, normally we have like this center about ourselves, right? Even if we haven't seen someone for many years, we still recognize him. Something inside of him is permanent and the same as it always was and always will be. So it's establishing that normally there people come with consistency that gives us a sense of a routine and foundation in a way. That's why we make friends, we turn back to family if they are stable. Um, Sometimes even if people even try to change us over time, we sometimes shift back into our old ways because there was already something established with us that either connects with people or helps people recognize us without even like a second thought in a way. All a person's other qualities turn around the center. So it's like whatever is in us, it's influencing the things around us. But Annie Wilkes occasionally lost her center. For periods of time, which could only last a few seconds or longer, there was nothing solid in her. Everything about her was in motion, with no basis on which to rest. It was as if a hole opened up inside of her and swallowed every human quality she possessed. She seemed to have no memory of these times. In contrast, however, her body was very solid and strong, especially for a middle-aged woman. So now looking here is that he's establishing that she's not stable. There's nothing safe about her. We can't connect with her because we're not sure which side of her to trust. Anyone who kind of comes across like concepts of psychology, particularly narcissists, in a way, they don't have their own center in a way, as Paul describes. There's a hole in them, and a lot of times they latch onto people who kind of already have their own identity. But the thing is, still, because there's such a black hole, they slowly but surely suck that stability out of that stable person. They suck the identity out of that stable person and kind of whatever it to accommodate the black hole in them, they kind of have to create this world to make them feel like a person or feel like they have an identity of their own. But a lot of times they're really sucking the life out of somebody else to kind of operate through life. And in a way, I kind of see this in Annie. The unpredictability keeps the reader in a constant state of tension, unaware of Annie's benevolent facade. Like, we're not sure when the mask will slip. Then there's also symbolism and metaphors in here with the purpose of adding the suspenseful atmosphere. For example, we have the typewriter that Annie gives Paul when she makes him write on a manuscript. Now, remember how I said that she made Paul burn fast cars? Sometime after that scene, she makes him write another manuscript, but she makes him write another manuscript to add to the Misery novels. Mind you, we just saw earlier that Misery is not recoverable. Somehow she makes him um, bring her back to life in a way. So the typewriter might represent Paul's creative control or lack thereof, because in the beginning he was typing away and he had a sense of freedom. Now the typewriter, the same tool is like a sense of loss of freedom, loss of autonomy. And it's almost a tool of both liberation and entrapment. So this isn't just tied to Annie's crazed fan with a god complex. Nature, in a way, it also points to the contrast of his career as an author. So being trapped to something fans preferred, and Paul reluctantly feeding the crowd what they want and wanting to break away from them at the same time. With that said, the other thing we will explore that is a literary element in a way is themes. So, all relationships have potential red flags, and if they are not addressed, these red flags can become toxic, right? But what do you do when the relationship is actually one sided and the relationship that you have is with something that doesn't know you, doesn't know that you exist, or is just fiction? Now, that is where the pop psychology concept comes in, and this concept is called parasocial relationships, which involves forming one sided connections with media personalities, celebrities, influencers, or fictional characters. So often there's a deep feeling and personal attachment despite the lack of reciprocal interaction. Now, I have to say, we're all guilty of this because, as mentioned, we all turn to entertainment for something or turn to these entertainers for something. Just think of it like this. Have you ever caught yourself like overly fond of a certain character? Like, for those of us who love books, right? We all come across that book where we just get immediately attached to like one character, especially if we're reading a romance novel. I love romance. And there's like a hot dude in there, and you find yourself just like, oh, I wish there was a dude like this. Like, there's that immediate parasocial connection happening, and the parasocial interaction, or again, going back to like people who are fans of Family Guy, they connect a lot with Stewie because he's like a charismatic character, or with people who watch The Flash because he's hot, or um maybe going to like real life people, like people love Selena Gomez. Her fans love her because her persona is being kind and graceful and things like that, and people relate to that, especially those who um promote or wish there is more kindness, more softness, more understanding, more advocacy for mental health in our modern age. Or Taylor Swift fans, they relate to her music because they feel like she's pointing out, she understands relationships or she understands their relationships. I even sometimes see in the comment section of fans saying, "Oh my gosh, this song was meant for me." Like we all do it. We all do it. All these examples, I mean, there's so many examples. There, all of these are characteristics of engaging in a parasocial relationship. According to an article published on Psychom in 2023, like any relationships, parasocial ones develop normally. We encounter someone, we feel a sense of attraction, admiration, or respect for that person, or all three, and we seek out more contact. In this way, PSRs are very similar to ordinary social relationships. And there are very different ways that might form. So, parasocial relationships are usually based on either romantic attraction. There's the task attraction. So, again, they like McDonald's. Oh my gosh, I love McDonald's. See, if they can do it, I can enjoy eating my junk food all the time. That makes me feel better about myself. Then there's the hero role model complex. So, which I find a little bit more dangerous than these. Honestly, the hero role model attraction, which happened to a lot of child stars in a way, and their fandoms, a lot of them connect them and see them as a role model, and that never ended well. That never, ever, ever ends well. And Annie Wilkes here takes the concept of parasocial relationships to an all time extreme. So, Homegirl just took it to an all time high, and she is not coming back. She's gone. She's on the other side of Crazy Town. So, in this novel, Annie's parasocial relationship with Paul leaves the ballpark of typical fan admiration. If anything, we see it quickly morphing into a nightmarish scenario where the lines between fiction and reality become dangerous, or dangerously blurred, I should say. So, in a way, this mirrors the potential risk of modern social relationships, parasocial relationships, I should say, where individuals can develop into intense and unrequited connections with media figures through social media, online content, and other digital platforms. In the Stephen King novel, Annie's delusional perception of her relationship with Paul reflects the consequences of unchecked fantasism in an age where media consumption is more immersive and immediate than ever before. It really is. So, as I said, there's so many examples of this. For example, I don't know. So, if you are familiar with the actor Chris Evans, I don't know. There was like a weird blimp. I kid you not. I think it was last year. It was a weird blimp where he he's known to be a bachelor, kind of like the hot black bachelor. He's normally often single. He's never there's this whole shtick in the fandom, like, why is the world's hottest bachelor have yet to find his true love or something like that? But every time he finds a relationship, his fans pop off on him or the person he is with, mostly him. And I think I remember last year this time they popped off on him basically. And there was this video where the fan was on Twitter. Was it called Twitter back then? I think it was also called X. I don't know. I don't remember. Elon Musk, you ruined Twitter. Anyways, whatever it's called now, he was on the platform and there was this tweet, basically. And, um, you know what? I'm going to call it Twitter because I want Twitter back. Twitter. Anyways, he was on, there was this fan, they wrote this paragraph message to Chris Evans saying how disappointed they were and I thought you could do better and you disappointed your fans. I used to follow you. All because this dude, he dated someone kind of a couple of years younger than him. I think he's in his 40s and she's in her like mid to late 20s, which happens. Age different relationships happen. There is a there is a fine line. We can all agree. There is a fine line between normal age differences and very toxic age differences. We all know this, but it seems like this one was like a normal age difference, you know. Okay, fine. She was a bit young, but not so young where it felt creepy. Okay, it wasn't creepy. This girl was a full grown adult. She wasn't a girl, she was a full grown adult. And then he's, at the time, I think he was just 40. I mean, that's still young. A lot of people say that's old, but I've been around a lot of adults. There's old and then there's old. 40 is still kind of young, to be honest with you. That's not even old. You're just leaving your 30s. It's not even old. So, um, yeah. And yeah, the fan went off. It was like, I'm so disappointed in you. And the funny part is, it's like a lot of these fans that pop off on them be like teenagers or young girls in their early 20s that pop off on him, and it's just like, girl. Now what if he was dating you? Then what, you would not say anything? I don't know, it's just one of those things where it's just like, you're so weird. You are. And then there's another instance where I found this so stupid, but yeah, I think it was a couple, was it last year or maybe the year before? I can't remember. I think it was when we were just finally getting out of the I don't know if we can say that still, but out just coming out of the, you know what, the, you know, and I think it was. But anyways, Lizzo did this juice detox, which a lot of people do when they want to clean out their system. It's perfectly normal. It's not a weight loss thing. It's actually just cleaning out your system, especially if you know there's something going on with your stomach. Everyone, I think everyone should recommend, you know, have a once in a blue moon detox because of all the toxins we let into our body. And I'm not gonna lie, if you're especially even in a Western world, especially countries like America, more than likely your food has a lot of toxins in it that you need to clean out of your body. So, and people wonder why they're always sick and stuff. But anyways, yeah, she wanted to go on these detox, and her fans start attacking her. The thing that attracted people to Lizzo was the fact that she was a big girl and she wasn't. She was pretty good. She was a confident big girl. You know, she danced pretty good. I mean, girl was flipping it. I actually showed her on a few times too. But um, the problem is also with our culture in this Gen Z age is that everyone is so sensitive. So it's like you can't mention anything revolving around like weight or diet culture without somebody thinking you have some sort of a eating struggle, which is not always true. And they thought Lizzo was, I don't know, betraying her fans who looked up to her, which I get it. It's fair. You know, for a lot of people who might struggle with that area in their lives, they felt relieved that there was someone that they could relate to. Again, parasocial relationship. How that parasocial relationship got toxic? Well, girl did something out of step of whatever fantasy that they had, and they popped up on her so much so that she had to actually address her own fans and explain herself. Girl, let me tell you, there's never going to be any instance where I'm like, I don't explain myself to people. I don't explain to myself to nobody, okay? There's only one person I explain that myself to, and nobody else. So I live my life for one person. I don't live my life for other people. Yes, we should all live our lives in a way that it's not toxic to people, and it should, you know, embrace each other and, you know, promote kindness and spread encouragement and empowerment. But there comes a time where toxic positivity is an actual thing. And I feel like this culture suffers from toxic positivity a lot. And this is one of those instances. So Same thing happens with Ariana Grande fans. There's like this recent scandal where she, she the claim is that she wasn't faithful to her partner. I get it. Some people, they looked up to her. They saw her like this delicate angel, whatever. She's a human being like you and me. She's not an angel. And if she was, if you actually learned about angels, they're not perfect. They're just as problematic as we are if they are not careful. So, um, yeah. And yeah, so they kind of a lot of it. I'm seeing videos still of people talking about her relationship past, and it's like, I get it. We don't want to endorse a toxic pattern, but is it really ruining your life that someone you looked up to was, uh, you know, kind of problem, kind of have their struggles? You know, I don't endorse cheating at all. If someone ever cheated on me, that's the end of the relationship. I can say that. At the same time, I move on with my life. And that whatever that person is going through, clearly they have some sort of internalized struggles that they feel the need to do that to people. It's wrong, but some people feel the need to do that to people. And I don't know why. Some people have self esteem issues. Some people can't be without a partner. Some people can't be in a committed relationship because maybe they fear commitment. Maybe there's a trauma. You know, you don't know the girl. So it's like you're attacking what she did, but you're not understanding her. And even though people who call themselves psychoanalyzing her, it doesn't make sense. It's like, do you know her? Are you her psychologist? No. And are you really justified to attack her? No, I'm pretty sure the same people who are attacking her are the same ones that cheated in their relationships. I'm not even gonna lie. I'm not even gonna lie. But yeah, um, yeah, those examples of toxic fandoms. Fandoms are so if you know, you know. But anyways, let me not rant on of how much I am afraid of fandom culture. But in Misery, Annie does the same thing. She went off the rails when she found out that Paul basically asked Misery Chastain just to start anew with an altogether different project called Fast Cars. So she also basically berates him for the amount of swearing in Fast Cars, as mentioned before, and at some point forced him to burn the entire thing on a grill. So, like Annie here, these kind of fans often believe they know the true potential of whoever their stan is, and it's just I hate to burst their bubble, but you don't know them. You just don't. You don't know the person, and they're human. So sorry. But Annie was one of those people like, I know your true potential. I know your purpose in life. It was so strange. But moreover, Annie's possessiveness and controlling behavior towards Paul underscore the power of imbalances inherent in parasocial relationships. So, in the digital age, fans can feel an unprecedented closeness to their favorite personalities through social media interactions, leading to an illusion of intimacy. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm not gonna put the blame completely on fandoms because let's be real, some creators feed into that crap. They do. Some of them, like, mm. So Annie's character serves as a cautionary tale, highlighting the potential for fans to overstep boundaries and develop harmful fixations in the absence of healthy boundaries between creators and consumers. Because that is just what you are at the end of the day. I have to break it to you. You are just a consumer. That is it. That is the that is the reality of the relationship between you guys. Yes, they make it feel personal, but that is the real relationship. You are the consumer, they are the producers, you are the consumer. So much as you consume, that is what you will be until you one day become a producer. That's just what it is. Annie Wilkes also raises questions about the impact of parasocial relationships on mental health. Her obsessive behavior, outbursts, and manipulative tactics underscore the potential for such relationships to contribute to unhealthy psychological states. In the modern era, where individuals can immerse themselves in the lives of media figures, it becomes crucial to examine the fine line between appreciation and fixation, acknowledging the potential for real world consequences with these boundaries are crossed. In conclusion, Annie Wilkes in Misery serves as a harrowing cautionary tale about the dangers of parasocial relationships, particularly in the contemporary landscape of media consumption. Her character raises important questions about the boundaries between creator and fans, the impact of obsessive fandom on mental health, and the need for a nuanced understanding of the dynamics at play in our interconnected digital age. In other words, chill out. It's not that deep. If you're mad about a movie, chill out. It's not that deep. You can live. I promise you can live without that movie. I wholeheartedly promise you. Now, for people who are struggling with um, understanding the difference between reality and fantasy, that is a different level of commentary and often involves actual medical analysis, actual professional analysis. And that's not something to joke around about. Those kind of people, it's not their fault. But for those of you, there's really nothing wrong with you, you just have a superiority complex, chill out, basically. Yeah, that's the story. I feel so bad because this is a good winter read. I will say this. It is. It is. And, it's cold. It's bitter. It's like adventurous. It's exciting. It's also strange, uncanny. But if you really want to go, if you were, you really want to look deep into what it all means and stuff, that's just what it is. At least that's what I believe. This isn't, I will preface that this isn't the true, tried and true conclusion of what Misery is all about. Feel free to read the book all on your own and come up with your own conclusions about what you think the book is about. For all I know, everything that I said could be entirely completely different than what you came after reading the book. But I recommend it. It's really good. If you want that winter thriller, read it. If you want something about psychology in a way, read it. If you just love Stephen King and you never heard of this novel, read it. If you end up hating it, fair. If you end up loving it, fair. Just remember, it's just the book. But that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Literatureology. I have been your host, Eliot Taylor. If you would like to stay updated on any recent uploads, any recent episodes, or even if you like bonus content or behind the scenes content, or feel free to subscribe. But I hope you have a wonderful day and comment below what you think of this book that we talked about. And you can also comment anything that you suggest that I talk about on this podcast, whether it's your favorite book or maybe something you came across and you want me to talk about it. That's fine. By all means, you could do it here. You can comment on my Instagram page. That's totally fine. I don't mind. I love suggestions. But anyways, until our very next literary adventure, you will be hearing from me soon.